Hi everyone. In this video I am going to explain request dispatcher and send redirect. Let us start with an example. I have created a web application in NetBeans. I have created simple JSP page with an hyperlink. Let me show that hyperlink. Okay. When I click on this, in the href I have given the URL pattern for servlet called servlet1. If you see the web.xml, I have created a hello world servlet in NetBeans, okay, and the URL pattern is 1. Okay, so when I click on this hyperlink, the request will reach the servlet, and what I'm doing here is, when I click on that link, I will display the students in a table format. Okay, for that what I have done is, from both doGet and doPost, I call the method called process request. By default, NetBeans creates a method like this. If you don't want this, you can change, but for now both get and post will call this method. So whatever you send output from here, that will reach the browser. Okay, what I'm doing here is, I have created two student objects and I display those two students in table format. So I generated HTML. Can you see how complex it is to generate HTML response from servlet? You have to, can you see the strings, everything you have to generate using out.println. Whenever you get the dynamic value, see, in the table every row contains one student record, right? In for every student there will be first name and last name, so you have to create one tr for every student and one td for f name and one td for l name. So whenever you want to display the dynamic value, you have to append that to trtd, and you have to append with the value from the student, and then you will append. So you have to mix this logic, means you have to create string with trtd, and then you have to concatenate, and then you have to write the html, and you have to concatenate the dynamic values. It is very difficult to generate response from servlet. Okay, see, also can you observe, since this is a string, whenever you encounter double quotes, you should put backslash, otherwise it will be a problem. This you must you know all this already. You have to escape whenever there is a special character. Okay, instead of this, let us see, I will put border to make you believe that this is in fact a HTML table. Can you see, this is a table. Okay, instead of that, I can use request dispatcher. Means, if you observe this is a servlet, right? So whenever you click the hyperlink, the request will reach the servlet. Okay, the servlet can send the response using out.println. As you know, out is a print writer object. Whatever you write using println, that will be displayed to the browser. Okay, this is the browser. Okay, so whenever you send a request, the container will create a request and response objects. you see the servlet, can you see both do get and do post will receive the request and response object. Who will create it? The container will create it. Okay, so the servlet can send directly the response using out.println statements, right? But using this approach is difficult. Instead of that, you can forward the request. Instead of directly sending this response from servlet, what you can do is you can pass these request and response objects to another JSP page. Okay, so that JSP page will send the response to the browser. So in the earlier example, when you send the request, the servlet creates the student objects and it is sending the response directly. But to send the response, it has to generate the HTML page. It is very difficult to generate the HTML response from servlet. So instead of that, you can set the required values in request scope. Means in the request object you place the student objects, okay, and dispatch this request, this original request, to the JSP page. Okay, the JSP page receives the original request and response objects. Okay, so in the JSP page, retrieve the students from the request object and display the values in the form of table. Okay, hope you understand this concept. In this example, the servlet receives request and response object, okay, and using response.getWriter you will get the printWriter object, and using println you will send directly the response to the browser. But to generate HTML response from servlet, it is difficult thing. Instead of directly generating the response from the servlet, you can dispatch or forward this request to JSP page. Okay, I don't have any marker, so bear with me with these diagrams. Okay, here the content is important, not neat pictures. Okay, so instead of sending response directly from servlet, you can dispatch or forward this request to JSP, and this JSP will receive the original request and response objects also when you forward the request to the JSP, and the JSP will generate the HTML response by getting values from the request object. You create the student objects in the servlet, place them in the request object, and forward the request to the JSP, and the JSP page will retrieve the student objects from the request object and it will generate HTML response. Let us see how to achieve that. Let me comment this or remove this. Okay, I will add this into a list, these two student objects. Okay, import list and array list. One. Okay, then request is an object, right? In request you can put some objects using set attribute method. So you can say request dot set attribute, give some name. Since these are student list, I will give student list and give the object. What is the object name? st list. Okay, this is any name you can put with any name you like, and this is the reference you are placing. That means the two students are stored first in the list, and that list is added to the request. When you forward the original request to the JSP will get this request and response objects also. So whatever you place using set attribute, you can get those from JSP page also, because when you forward the request to the JSP page receives these request and response objects. So before receiving these objects, you have placed something in the request object. So the JSP page can get those objects from request. What we are doing, I have set a list before forwarding the request to the JSP page. So once the request reaches the JSP can retrieve that student objects, that is the list object, and iterate them and display in a form of HTML table. So it is done. How to get the, or how to forward the request to the JSP page means you have to get the request dispatcher object. There is something called request dispatcher. You have to get from request objects, request dot get request dispatcher, and tell the JSP name. Okay, what is the JSP page? I will create some JSP page, new JSP student JSP, something like this. So from the servlet, I will forward the request to student JSP.jsp. Okay, import this request dispatcher. You have to say forward. If you see the, you have to forward this request and response objects. That's what I have explained. The original request and response received by the servlet will be transferred to this JSP page to which we are forwarding. Done. So what will happen when the servlet receives the request? It will create two student objects. It will add those into the list, and it will set that list into request object using set attribute, and then it will forward the request to the JSP page, and the JSP page will get this list from the request object and generate the HTML response. Now what we have to do here, in the earlier video I have explained that you can write Java code in JSP in scriptlet section. So you have to say list st_list is equal to, but in the previous video, whenever I have explained that whenever you want to use some class, you have to import that using page directive. In the page directive, you have to specify import java.util.list. So, and we have to say request dot. In the earlier video, I have explained that there are some implicit objects. Out is one such implicit object. Request is another implicit object. Request means HTTP servlet request. Okay, in JSP you can simply call or say request to get the HTTP servlet object. Request dot get attribute, and what is the name we have given in the servlet? That name we have to give here. Okay, this is an object. You have to typecast that into list. Okay, The returned value is an object you have to typecast, and then what I have to do is for int I is equal to 0, I less than strlist dot size I plus plus. Okay, this is the important thing here. If you see, I have ended the scripted section because to display the HTML I have to end the scripted first, and then I have to write my HTML. I have to say tr td tr td. Okay, okay, and here you, if you have seen my earlier video, I have used the expression tag. You can use expression tag. First get the student one, student st is equal to strlist dot get of I. If you see, since I am using student, I have to say import student by using page directive. This will be object, you have to typecast that. Then you have to use expression tag st dot get fname. Okay, and then you have to say expression tag st dot get lname. Okay, I have to start the table tag here. Okay, now we will run this. I will run the index.jsp first. Okay, can you see I got the output? I will set the bg color is equal to green. I will, when you click on this, can you see I got the response now from JSP. But can you see the URL still shows the servlet, because in request dispatching it will show the original URL itself even after forwarding. Okay, that is the one important thing. Can you see once when I click here, it reaches the servlet and the servlet forwarded the request to the JSP. This output is generated from the JSP, but if you observe the URL, it still shows the URL pattern servlet, because in requested dispatcher mechanism the original URL won't be changed because it is internal, means it won't, even though the this response is generated by JSP, the URL won't be changed. This is one important thing. Okay, I will explain JSP, request send redirect in this example. Instead of using request dispatcher, okay, I will comment these two lines and observe carefully. If I say response dot send redirect, of student JSP, see what happens. There is something called response.sendRedirect. In the previous example, from the servlet, I am forwarding the request to the JSP using RequestDispatcher.forward. Now I have commented this and I have used response.sendRedirect. You will get the exception. Okay, already exception came. We can see from the output. Can you see? Let me clear this. If I display out.println htList dot size, I will get the exception. See this? I will explain. Let me refresh. Can you see? I got the null pointer exception because when you forward the request to the JSP page, the original request and response object will be transferred to the JSP page. But if you use send redirect, what will happen is this is the servlet. Okay, when you send request to the servlet, okay, and if this servlet use send redirect to the JSP page, what will happen is you will get response from the server to the browser, okay, the browser will get 302 response code and the JSP page to which it should forward the it should send the request. Okay, see, the browser gets a response code as 302 and the JSP page name to which it needs to send or make a new request. Okay, as I have explained you previously, whenever you make a request, the container will create request response objects, right? And these request and response objects are gone once the response is received by the browser. So in the send redirect, what happens is, when you say send redirect from the servlet, the the browser will receive a response code as 302. That means it understands that it has to make a new request to the page. Which page? That page will be mentioned. See, when you say response.send redirect, a response code 302 will be sent to the browser, and along with that the JSP page or some resource name will be sent as a response. So browser understands, whenever it sees the 302 response code, it understands that it receives some page name or the resource name, and it has to make a new request to the page or resource mentioned in the send redirect argument. Okay, so it will receive this JSP page name and 302 from server. Okay, and the browser reads that JSP page name whenever it sees the 302 response code and makes a new request to the JSP page. Okay, so the browser will now make another request to the JSP page. So these request and response objects are cannot be accessed in this JSP page, because now these request and response objects are different, because the browser created a new, sends a new request. So new request response objects are created in the JSP. If you try to get the student list, you won't get, because the student list was placed in this request object, and this request object died when the response came from server. So these request and response objects will not be there in existence once the response is reached by the browser. So when a new request is made, new request response object gets created. This request object is not this one. So when you try to get the student list from this request object, you will get null. So when I call size method, I got null pointer exception. So basically what we have to understand is, in forward mechanism, when you set something in the request object, you can access that request object in the JSP page. But because the same request and response objects will be forwarded to the JSP page. See, request is made to the servlet forwards the request, means the same request, and the request will be processed and response will be sent. So only one request response got created in the forwarding mechanism. In send redirect mechanism, request response object created and the response came back, and a new request is initiated by the browser. So there are two requests. In case of request send redirect mechanism, two requests are made. So this request is entirely different from this request object. That is the reason you didn't get anything here. Okay, if you see, I have removed that. I still got that. Since st list is null, what I can do is, if st list dot not equal to null, Yes. See, whenever you want to write HTML, you have to end the scriptlet and write the HTML. You have to say no students to display something. See, when you start the servlet, you can end the servlet if you want to display HTML. And once the HTML is completed, you can start the scriptlet to complete the for condition, I mean the brace, ending brace, and for the if also, like that. So using scriptlets, you can mix the scripted code and the HTML code, and you can script the scripted code and HTML code like that. Now we will see the, can you see? Now it says no students to display, because if you use a forward mechanism, if you set something in the servlet, you can access in the JSP. But if you use send redirect, you cannot access that in the JSP page, because this is the entirely new request created by the browser, right? This request, if you see, this request and response is called one request response cycle. So this request and response, this is another request response cycle. Okay, if you observe the page name, now it shows student jsp.jsp instead of /1, because in send redirect the browser will get the response 302 and it will make a new request to the resource mentioned in the send redirect. Okay, whatever the page or servlet you specified in send redirect, the browser will initiate the new request to the that resource. That's why in send redirect it will, the URL will change, whereas in if you use forwarding request dispatch.forward, you won't see any change, means it will still show as one only, even though it is the JSP that shows the response. Okay, and what is the difference between send redirect and request dispatcher is, you cannot forward request to the resource which is not in your web application. See, only you can forward to the JSP page which is in your hello world app. You cannot forward request to the resource outside the web application. Using send redirect, you can send a request to the resource outside your web application. If you want to send request to another web application, you cannot use request dispatcher.forward. Okay, you can, in that case you can use send redirect. This is one difference. Okay, hope you understand. Thank you.